So we are really excited to be here to talk to you guys today. I would love to invite the panelists to just introduce themselves, take a couple minutes, tell you about who they are, where they work, what they do, what their goals are. So Daniel, would you mind coming up first and doing a little introduction?
Not at all. My name is Daniel Padgett, and I am head of conversation design at Google. I work with, I have a team of designers who, interaction designers, some who specialize in voice interactions, some who specialize in designing interactions for the screen. And we are creating conversational experiences across multiple surfaces that Google supports, including, very recently products like Home, the multimodal experience that we have for Assistant on our phones, on Android, on our flagship Pixel, Wear, like watches. So we're creating those experiences across services for Google. My team focuses primarily on what we call the core experience. So we focus on building experiences around media, communications, those answers that you get about the weather, sports, finance, that sort of thing. So yeah, we're creating these dialogues between human and machine to help people get things done in their world.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Cathy, could you give us a little intro?
Sure. I'm Cathy Pearl. So I'm the Vice President of User Experience at a company called Sensely, which is a startup. We have a virtual nurse avatar that you can have conversations with. This is me back in a long time ago getting print shop for the Commodore 64. So I got interested in computers when I was very young, and my dad bought a Commodore VIC-20 when I was 8, and I was very interested in programming it. And one of the things I was most interested in was actually getting the computer to talk to me. Text back then, but I wrote a little chat bot, and I was very intrigued by that, but of course there weren't really any jobs for such things. But over the course of my career, spent a little time at NASA working on helicopter simulators with cognitive load on pilots. Spent a long time at Nuance, which works on IVRs, phone systems that everybody loves to hate. Learned a lot about designing conversational systems there. This other company in the lower right-hand corner, we built conversations on an iPad app with things like Esquire magazine's advisor for how to dress for a date or what product to put in your hair. But there were these immersive conversational experiences. And most recently, I'm at a company called Sensely. We have a virtual nurse avatar. We have lots of different avatars. We like to help people who have chronic health conditions. The nurse can talk to you, you can talk back, and lead you through maybe some certain exercises you have to do for your health. As far as goals, I'm looking to make more things conversational and hopefully show the world that even though we don't necessarily have all the pieces of AI and machine learning, you can still have very interactive, engaging conversations even without that.
My name is Mariana Lin, and I'm going to call myself an AI ghostwriter for now. I have basically started off with my career in writing. This is a quote that I thought was really funny, and for anyone in voice or conversation design probably will give them a little chuckle. 2 people in a conversation amount to 4 people talking. The 4 are what one person says, what he really wanted to say, what his listener heard, and what he thought he heard. So hence the challenges of not only human to human conversation, but a human to machine conversation. I was born in Taipei. I've lived in New York and studied abroad, and have a bit of understanding of different cultures and languages, which is one of the things I'm particularly interested in conversation design. I mostly worked as a writer and editor for the last 15 years, and I started really at the time when print was going digital. And so what was interesting in working with a lot of these publications is they were trying to understand how did this new form of interacting, instead of it being a physical page, but the screen and different ways to engage with it, how did that change the content and the voice of what they wanted to present. I sort of fell into the digital and voice interaction when Apple recruited me from New York, and I've been at Apple for 5.5 years, and I left recently, and I worked for 3.5 at Siri as the principal creative there behind the writing and the dialogue. And I'm currently contracting as an AI writer for different companies. So my areas of interest are voice, which is really creating a compelling voice that's tied to both brand and character, which are actually two different things, in my opinion. I'm really passionate about word choice as a writer, and language and culture, and conversation flow. And I'm also really, one of the things that I've been excited about is to encourage more writers to go into the field. I'm also really curious about a non-mimetic application of AI. Just sort of, AI has been used to, sort of the way technology has advanced is to try to mimic and replicate the way humans talk, but I'm very curious about ways in which we could advance human conversation as well.
So I'm Erik Vinkhuyzen. I work at Nissan Research Center here in Sunnyvale. We're building the autonomous vehicles. Before that, I worked at the Institute for Research on Learning, and there's a few people here from that place. I'm a social scientist. I look at the world probably a little differently than a lot of you. Really taking a social perspective, and I think that social interaction is oftentimes an ignored aspect in artificial intelligence. I feel a little awkward now presenting these slides because it's going to be like a little story about the AI now. Is that all right?
That's okay.
So I'll go through this, and I apologize for taking more time than some of the other folks. What I was going to do, I'd like to ground whatever I say in a little bit of empirical examples. And so I'm going to run you something really quick. But one of the things I wanted to argue is that shared knowledge is really something that's crucial to any communication and interaction. And that is the thing that is so difficult for artificial intelligence. I was going to illustrate this, and I guess I will, with a little video where this is now for the Nissan research. I'm driving down Castro Street. I'm sure you all are well familiar. And I'll just play you 10 seconds of a little interaction that goes on. So this is me in the car. You don't see me, but I am in the car, trust me. And this is a person who crosses the street right in front of me, okay? It could not be simpler, right? As somebody in a crosswalk, and I yield to that person. What I want to say is that, in order for this kind of thing to run off, and to run off so smoothly millions of times every day, right, between people, is that they need and they rely on a shared view of the world, okay? We both rely on the fact that we can see the scene in very much the same way. Okay, we can both see that there's roads, there's a median, there's sidewalk, that there's important aspects of those things, namely that I, as a driver, am supposed to be on the road, right? That I'm not going to veer into her because she's on the median, because that's a safe place for pedestrians to be. There's other objects, right? Parked cars and trees. We all have experience with these things, right? We know what it feels like to walk into a tree. It hurts. And there's pedestrians. We rely on each other to interpret the world in very much the same way. She, the lady that crosses in front of me, relies on me that I'm paying attention, right? That's not always the case with our cell phones, but that is what she relies on. That I'm in control of my vehicle, that I can see her, that I can see that she's a pedestrian who wants to cross, right? That we are in potential conflict. And that I know the rules of the road, that I know that she has the right of way in crosswalks, and that in California it is common for cars to stop. Not in other places, mind you, in Paris not so much. But here it is, the norm that we stop. It is only with our joint reference to this background knowledge that these things can come off so smoothly and so unproblematically. And that is what we need. So communicating between autonomous vehicles and other road users is one of the roadblocks for autonomous vehicles. It is one of the things that is most challenging. Anybody will tell you that's involved in this field. The real issue is city driving, where we're encountering bicyclists, pedestrians, and other drivers that are communicating through their movement, right? And we, as drivers, the autonomous vehicle needs to be able to interpret that movement and needs to be able to respond to it, but needs to also be aware that its movements will generate responses on other road users. And so that is part of what wanted to share with you before we start. And I apologize for taking more time than all the other people.
No, you're good.
I feel a little bit embarrassed.
No, you're awesome. You're great. Thank you guys so much for those great introductions. If we could come back this way to Daniel and talk a little bit about, we all work in conversation in some way between AI and people. And for your work, what are some of the goals of this communication?
The goals of the communication. For us, we're really trying to create an experience that allows people to do things. Basically, it's a matter of convenience, right? And that's what we're finding in this particular space. It's actually easier in some instances, in some contexts, for us to talk with a machine as opposed to, say, pulling something out and tapping it. I gave some examples at a talk I did at I/O about the number of taps it takes to, say, play a song on Spotify on your mobile phone. We used to think that was the absolute ultimate convenience, but now that I can turn my head and speak to something in the corner of my kitchen and say, play the latest record by Spoon on Spotify, and that happens instantaneously. It's about convenience, but that's currently getting things quicker, or getting just again that convenience factor. I think there's many more applications beyond that, and people looking at things around accessibility and opening up areas to people who might who it's best for them to use their voice.
Right.
And these new ways of interacting with computers are just kind of opening up possibilities for them. And that's some of the stuff I'm really excited about. That's a little bit more, it's researchy and future state, at least from where I stand. So.
Great, thank you. And how about you, Cathy?
I think about two main goals. One is certainly the convenience, but also the fact that I don't have to mold the way I think to the computer. So for example, one of the examples I like to give is I had to reboot our router or something, and I wasn't sure if the Wi-Fi was back on yet, so I just, without thinking, said, Alexa, are you working? And she said, yes, everything's working fine. And it hadn't even occurred to me, what do I need to say to find out if the Wi-Fi is working? I just said it. And I think that's one thing, is it's just, I don't have to think about which button, which menu. So many apps, I spend so much time trying to find the option I want, when I could just ask for it, how much easier. Another example is they introduced a new feature on the Amazon Echo to do notifications. One day a yellow ring came on. I didn't know what that was. I said, Alexa, what's up with the yellow ring? She said, oh, that means notifications, and she explained it to me. So again, to bypass sort of user manuals. But thinking more about my work at Sensely, one of the reasons we feel voice is so important is because it's engaging. And we're working with people who might have difficult health conditions. Their doctor maybe has asked them every day to take their weight and blood pressure and answer the same 3 questions. Really boring. Who wants to do that? But with Molly, with our avatar, they're a little bit more likely to engage with her. They start to build a relationship with her. They apologize if they miss their daily check-in. And that nudge, might make them more likely to do these tasks that they know they need to do, but we all need help with these things. And so the voice adds that level of engagement that they wouldn't get from just tapping on an app or something like that.
Yeah, I think for me, similar to what has been said, I think that what's interesting for me in the area of voice conversation design is 2 things. One is the functional or transactional aspect, and the other is the relational. And so I think the difference with approaching a machine for conversation, the way I see it versus for a VUI versus a GUI, is that we're not used to going up to humans and starting to tap on them. So when we came out with websites or iOS platforms, we taught a new way of interacting with people and getting information, but that didn't really translate to human interactions. The difference with conversation is that humans have already interacted with other humans for their entire lifetime with conversation. When they approach a machine, they're taking all that experience and perspective. And that's where we run into a lot of bumps and there are challenges to figure out what that new relationship will be. I'm very interested and passionate about finding a new way for people to interact with machine that's not going to set back human conversations. We're already seeing that happen with technology where the terseness, the transactional nature, the summary of our lives through social media, et cetera, it's impacting our human-to-human relationships. And I'm very curious about a way to create the relational piece of machine-human conversation design where it can further the way we interact with each other. And I think that's something that could be explored in a lot of different arenas.
So for us, when I focus on the interaction of autonomous vehicles and other road users, obviously voice might not be the right way to be communicating. We're exploring sound, but it seems like it might not be the best way. But obviously the goal there is safety, right? Primarily, it has to do with if we don't read other people right, we run the risk of making very bad decisions on the road. That's one thing. And the other thing is that if you are overly conservative in your, then basically you wait incessantly for people to be crossing in front of you and you'll never get anywhere. So you have to find that balance in there. But communication with other road users, like I said before, it's my jam. That's where we need to focus. Yeah.
So how do you go about designing for that? That's kind of a fine line between too conservative and safe enough.
Yeah, it's quite tricky, and it might be. So I think that. And what makes it particularly tricky, I'm not going to give you the solutions, is that it depends on context, right? You might be driving down the same road, and if it's not during rush hour, you might let people go, much more easily than during rush hour when, not going means that everybody behind you can't go either, et cetera. So it all depends on the context, and that's what makes this so tricky.
So let's switch it up. I think that really fascinating. Let's switch it up and maybe go the opposite way for the next question. So Maria, how is designing speech and conversation and communication? So we're talking about communicate. Some people work in speech, but I know some people are communicating with AI and humans in different nonverbal ways. How is this different from visually designing, do you think? Maria?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, well, I think I brought up an example earlier about how we are bringing a lot of preconceived notions and experiences to voice interface that we don't necessarily with visual interface when it comes to a relationship. I think another difference is that in visual interfaces, it's very easy to design and form that path for people. When you get to a page, there's only a certain number of buttons you can click, or if you're on your phone, there are you can lead people towards certain paths. I think with voice, you have this open-ended system, and you can say anything, and in response to what someone says, you can also say anything. And I think that presents a lot of design challenges, but I think it also presents a lot of opportunities. I think the other thing that will start to come out is that as there are going to be best practices for visual design, simplicity or colors and things like that, we'll find the same for conversation. I think that it's going to be very interesting to see. For example, even there have been studies about how women and men have different types of conversations. In different cultures and languages, there are different types of conversations. So I think this whole idea of one conversation fits all and there's one happy path is something that is going to be interesting to challenge and explore. I think conversations have different points, when it starts, when the handoff is between two people. In certain cultures and languages, a bit of more of a pause is normal, but in another culture, maybe that means that person's turn is over and it's time to jump in. So little nuances like that I think are going to be really interesting that as those get explored in voice design.
Thank you. And Cathy, how about for you and your work?
I think a lot about the precision, and similar to what you were saying about having a set of choices. Even if, though, in a voice state you had a set of choices, you're still guessing a bit about what the person actually said. I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about how, oh, Google speech recognition is 97% accurate, it's all solved, but we're really still a long way from having those easy conversations. And so you have to think about the fact that when someone presses a button, you know they pressed the button, you know the choice they made. When they speak, you have a pretty good idea, but you're not always sure the exact words they said. But on top of that, you've got to attach the meaning. So perhaps your recognition did a really good job of getting each individual word. I mean, it is getting quite good. But then you have to interpret that correctly. And I think a lot of times designers and developers make a lot of assumptions about how people are going to speak when they are responding to a prompt, like, when do you want to travel? They're like, I've got my grammar built so they can say any date. It's going to work great. And you put it in front of a user and they say, oh, next Tuesday. And you're like, but you weren't supposed to say that. So you have to really spend a lot of time getting it out there in the real world and realizing that people are going to, even in a constrained question that seems so straightforward, like when do you want to travel? If you said, what date do you want to travel? You'll probably get more people saying that expected input. But you really need to spend a lot of time making sure you get in real data from how people really talk so that you can actually map lots of different varieties of ways people want to tell their story.
Absolutely, and just to add on to that, there's a lot of ambiguity even if you hear clearly. So if you hear next Monday, people actually have different ideas of when it is, if it's,
Right.
say, a Sunday evening
Right,
or
absolutely.
a Sunday afternoon.
And how about in your work, Daniel?
Well, I can echo quite a bit of what's been said. First of all, there is this layer here when we're designing for voice interactions. Recognition is definitely different than understanding, and the error rate is actually quite low these days across the domain. In certain domains, it's still not great because they're complex domains. I think, to answer the question specifically about the difference between, say, designing for voice versus designing for more visual mediums, for me, the fact that voice is both linear and ephemeral. So it's always moving forward and it's always fading behind you, right? So as we have you're hearing me and then it's gone. You only have what you can recall, in your short-term memory, what I'm telling you. And then, you're bringing your experience to the world and applying that and applying meaning to what I have to say. On the visual side, as been mentioned, there's something on the screen. There's anchors there. There's things that you can point to. There's things that you can tap. There's things that you can touch. You can sit with it a bit longer, and you can work with it. It's a little more, I guess, stable. So that poses challenges when you're designing for a UI, again, that's linear and ephemeral. You have to really rely on the metaphor and on the rules, the inherent rules that we know about conversation, what people know about conversation, and use those to your advantage in helping something progress in the interaction.
Yeah, I'm really interested in the design challenges that we all face. What are some of the challenges that you face in dealing with this? I mean, I know there are so many, but you can go.
Me? Oh, okay. Well, certainly it's, first of all, understanding what people are, the understanding part is difficult. At Google, we're lucky enough to have a lot of people who are tackling that problem. And it's sort of my problem, but I'm more, I get to take benefit of the work that they're doing. But yeah, I think the understanding part is a really difficult problem. I think the challenges are around when people want to, they want to pivot. Yep. Because we kind of have these canonical ideas of how a conversation should go when someone starts down a path, and we create those, and we do a pretty good job of those. It's when people start to pivot. And I also think that things get tricky when you start to move out to the edges, when there are exceptions, when errors occur and things like that. And helping people get back on track or being able to pivot with them. And those are things that are difficult and challenging, and those are the areas that I think if you spend the time, those are the things that are going to make your interactions delightful, and people aren't going to curse at your bot and want to throw the device across the room.
Absolutely. So Cathy, for you, what are some of the biggest design challenges?
I think the biggest design challenge that voice recognition is facing right now is discoverability. I mean, I think about Amazon Echo has like 30,000 skills or something, and I've installed a few, and I can never remember the right key phrase to trigger it. And so teaching people not only what they can say, but what they can't say. Thinking about Siri, when Siri came out, and it was really primarily designed to do about 15 things really well. But saying, how can I help you, makes it seem like you could do anything. And then users get frustrated and disappointed very quickly. So like we have a healthcare app, and we want to, we can do a bunch of things, but it is a limited domain. How do we communicate properly? Like, these are the things you can do, and we can do those really well. But if you veer just outside that box, it's going to fail. And so until we get to the point someday in the future where you really could say everything, the challenge of guiding your user successfully, you don't want to overload them with like a 15-word menu. I mean, again, the cognitive load, you're not going to remember any of that stuff. How do you give them just enough to get them started, but then help them when they start to veer off track? And it's very challenging to make sure you're guiding the user to know what they can and can't say.
I think the challenges I have as a writer are probably also what make the job really interesting, because there are a lot of problems to solve. I think if we were just to write straight functional dialogue, it would be easy and anyone could do it. But everyone is going to, if they don't want it now, they will eventually want a brand, a voice, a bit of a personality to it to distinguish them from other voices and functions in the marketplace. And I think the challenge is to create a cohesive system all across the board where everywhere you are, you feel like you're talking to that same character or voice, which is harder than it seems, because what happens a lot when people get into voice is that because it's sort of a newish field, there's this temptation to just surprise and delight at every moment. And also to not think, well, is this going to be consistent with that character to tell this particular joke or to make that particular reference? But you kind of want like the easy laughs from the audience, going in. I think creating a cohesive system where you're thoughtful about where and when those moments of voice and identity and character come in are going to be what's interesting. But I think that if that can be done well and balanced in a way that's helpful at times, engaging at others, that's really, I think, one of the challenges for writers.
Yeah.
So our domain is quite different because of the nonverbal nature of the interactions. I would say there's two main areas of challenge. The first is prediction. So we have to predict what other road users are going to do. And there's different models that people use for that. And the simplest is basically that, like a Newtonian physics, like people will just continue on the same path that they're on now, and you measure their speed and you calculate out into the future. That's not very precise and not very accurate, obviously. And so then you have to overlay it with all kinds of knowledge about, the particular intersection that you're in, et cetera. So that predicting is very, very difficult. But as the example illustrated that I showed earlier, part of what makes it particularly difficult is that you are yourself an actor in it. Yeah. So you, in part, determine what is going to happen. And that is what is the really tricky part to reason about.
So in dealing with that, how important do you think it is in your work? I know you spoke a little bit about reading cues from humans. How important is this, and how do you design for that?
Well, first, we're spending a lot of time just looking at videos of people on the street and how they behave, and partly, how can you read intent, right? That's the real trick. How can you read the intention to go? And that's. And the big challenge is, how do you not end up as an AV standing in front of a person who is chatting with somebody else on the sidewalk, and you think that they're going and they're not, and now you're stuck. So obviously body language plays a huge part in that. A lot of the sensors that we're using, frankly, are too coarse to actually be able to distinguish that. Like, for instance, one of the major things that if you look at any kind of empirical data, one of the big cues of whether somebody is intending to cross is whether they are looking at you, right?
Interesting.
They're coming to the intersection and actually looking at you. That is a huge cue that we're all very much attuned to. Very few of the sensors are actually able to distinguish that, when you're coming at speed to the intersection. So it's those kinds of cues that we need to become more sensitive to in the algorithms to make it work.
Thank you so much. So I think everybody can kind of speak to this in their own way. Even if it's about nonverbal communication, verbal communication, nonverbal communication, how do you think about the voice of your AI or your conversation system? And I'll go first to Daniel. And you can define that however you want to.
Well, for Google Assistant, we actually have defined a persona. And so we took the approach where we, actually this happened before I got there, I'll have to say. I've only been there about 14 months. But just prior to me getting there, there was a team of people, some creatives, some folks from marketing, and some writers and GUI designers who basically got together and worked through what they wanted this essentially character to be. And first of all, they decided on the metaphor of an assistant as opposed to a friend or a buddy or something like that. They agreed that we needed to leverage the metaphor of an assistant. That was the first thing. Then they started talking about the traits of a helpful assistant, what that meant in the real world, and they also started talking about the attributes of the brand attributes, say, of Google that they wanted to infuse into this persona. And so there was just a lot of discussion about what this thing needed to be. I know there was some testing that was done. They kind of, in some instances, create a backstory, and that's not necessarily something that we release to the world. It's actually something that's used for people who write dialogue and who are creating this thing so that they have kind of a North Star to know what they're writing for. Because if you don't have that, then everybody is writing something different. And that's a big problem at Google because of our scale. So there had to be this kind of North Star around what this thing is that we were writing for. And again, that was just kind of a cross-functional effort, and there was some testing done to kind of make sure that they were on the right track. Several iterations of working with voice actors who they felt kind of were able to portray the character that they had, and there was a whole lot of time put into that, into selecting the right voice actor for that, and working with them to create the speech synthesis and the text-to-speech engines that we have. And so yeah, there's a whole process there.
Really, really fascinating. Thank you. How about for you, Cathy?
One of the things I keep thinking back to, which is kind of a cross between the last two questions, is one of the things we learned at my previous company, Volio, that was the one with the little iPad with the guy from Esquire. One of the things we realized quickly was, so in an IVR system, if you are in the middle of a dialogue and you say, like, what date are you traveling, and the person doesn't say anything, or they say something you don't understand, you have to reprompt them. You say, I'm sorry, I didn't understand that, et cetera. When we had the visual component with an actor, a recorded actor, asking a question like this guy saying, is your hair long or short or medium? If you said something we didn't understand, like, oh, it's as long as my, uncle's, rather than have the actor say, I didn't understand that, is your hair long, medium, or short, the actor would just continue with active listening, just kind of, and people would just automatically repeat themselves. We kind of found this out by accident. But if you're having a conversation with somebody and I say something confusing to you, you don't just say, please repeat that. You kind of look at me quizzically. And what do? Am I like, why are they looking at me? No, I say, oh, they didn't understand me. I'm going to speak again. Maybe I need to be more clear. And you can take advantage of some of those human-to-human conventions in some of these systems, like we have the avatar, so we can do something similar, where you can tell that I wasn't understood, and so you just naturally repeat yourself rather than have everything be a back and forth. We can't do everything with maybe with the eyebrow movement and all the things that humans can do, but we can start to adopt some of those techniques to be a little less robotic.
I want to actually add to that. It reminded me of the problem that we have, like at Google, in the media domain, for instance. If any of you have used the product, you might have been frustrated at times when you ask for one thing and it plays something entirely different. And the reason for that is, and to me, I get upset at that, not only because it's failed, but also because it's then a reflection on the persona. It's essentially ignored you. And so I work hard with the people who work on the platforms that we have to talk about how we can do better there, how we can come back and disambiguate or do better on our recognition and understanding in the first place so we reduce the number of problems. But that's how the user perceives it. It's like this thing is broken and that reflects on your persona. So these are things that need to be corrected.